It screamed across the battlefield, high, sharp, and unrelenting, a sound like nothing the enemy had ever heard before, a sound that announced death was coming, even before the first man fell. Tiny lead bullets, no bigger than a grape, spinning through the air with drilled holes that made them whistle like banshees. And yet most people today have never even heard of them. This was Rome's secret terror weapon, the whistling sling bullet, a weapon so small it could fit in your hand, yet powerful enough to break the courage of entire armies. Welcome to your daily history channel, Heroic History, where we bring you the most incredible stories of ancient warfare every single day. We're proud to be part of a growing community of history lovers. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button so we can keep sharing epic battle stories like this one. So how did those drilled sling bullets from Burnswark Hill actually make sound? Why did the Romans bother making them? And what would that have felt like on the ground? And what do they reveal about the psychological genius of Rome's war machine? Let's find out. Burnswark Hill, a windswept ridge in southwestern Scotland. It's not just a hill with a few old stones. Archaeologists dug there and found a concentration of Roman missile debris unlike almost anywhere else in Britain. We're talking hundreds of lead sling bullets called glandes, carved red sandstone ballista stones, and dozens, if not more, of iron arrowheads. In surveys of the site, only roughly 3% of the recovered lead dignity looked like it was related to Roman projectiles. That stat is a sharp red flag. This wasn't a casual target range. So, what exactly happened here? By the mid-2nd century AD, Rome had pretty much reached the edge of the known world, at least from their point of view. Up north, across the windswept hills of what's now southern Scotland, they were staring into the lands of the Caledonians and the Selgovae, wild, defiant tribes who refused to bow to the empire. Under Emperor Antoninus Pius, around 140 AD, Rome decided to push the frontier even farther north, past Hadrian's Wall, and they built a new line of defense, the Antonine Wall. It was their way of saying, this is still Rome. But walls only stopped so much. The tribes beyond them didn't quit. They raided, they ambushed, they burned Roman outposts. Every time the Romans thought the frontier was secure, the highlands answered back with fire. And right in the middle of this frontier, tension stood a place called Burnswark Hill, a steep flat-topped rise about 1,000 ft high, roughly 300 meters surrounded by slopes on three sides, and an Iron Age hill fort planted right on the summit. That hill fort sits like a watchtower over local routes, which is exactly why the Romans cared about it. Today it's quiet farmland in Dumfries and Galloway, but back then it was a fortified hilltop stronghold, probably belonging to the Selgovae tribe. It was perfectly placed to control local trade routes, which also made it a perfect target. Let me put the scale in perspective. The distribution mapping done during the Burnswark project shows Roman missile impacts stretched along about half a kilometer of the native rampart, not just focused on the main gate. If this were a routine firing range, you would expect impacts clustered at standard targets like gate models. But instead, fire is distributed along a long front, suggesting a short, intense bombardment meant to suppress defenders across the line. Combine that with the near-total dominance of Roman projectiles in the fines. Remember that approximately 3% exception, and the picture becomes vivid. Deliberate, heavy, long-range fire to neutralize a fortification quickly. What makes Burnswark exceptional across all of Roman Britain is the way the hill is literally sandwiched between two Roman camps, one to the south and one to the north. That configuration, a defended hillock between organized Roman positions, is unusual for Britain, and archaeologists read a lot into it. These weren't random bivouacs. The southern camp was clearly the main attack base, positioned for direct line-of-sight bombardment of the hilltop. The northern camp, smaller but strategically placed, likely meant to block any escape routes. One Roman camp on the south side of the hill had three wide gates that faced the fort, and outside those gates were large earthworks nicknamed the Three Brethren. Those earthworks make perfect platforms for ballista, heavy crossbow-like siege engines, to be placed in a line delivering direct shots at the fort's gateways. So on one hand, you've got ballista stones and direct bolts punching holes. On the other, you've got slingers and archers peppering the defenders with smaller, faster or whistling shot. It's layered suppression, and it's intentional. Well, that's been a mystery for decades, and archaeologists are still split between two main theories. Were those camps siege works or training grounds? For nearly 200 years, people argued both sides. From the 1860s onwards, some thought Burnswark was a training complex, a place where Roman armies practiced mass fire. But the 2015 Battlefield Archaeology Project brought new data to the table. The distribution and density of projectiles across half a kilometer, the presence of purpose-made whistling glands, ballista platforms aligned on the gates, and the dominance of combat-related debris, these collectively make training a poor fit. Why manufacture a specialized psychological projectile if you're just practicing? Why climb the effort to build specific, well-placed artillery platforms unless you plan to use them for a real tactical objective? And after the battle, the hill fort was never reoccupied. It was abandoned completely. That silence, that emptiness says a lot. The 2015 evidence pushes us toward the conclusion that Burnswark was the scene of an actual military action, likely a short, overwhelming bombardment intended to terrorize and force submission rather than a drawn-out siege. Okay, let's pull back a bit and talk about how the Romans fought at range. When you picture a Roman army, you're probably thinking of those heavy infantry guys, the legions carrying pila, the short-throwing javelins we often hear about. That's true. But in many battles, the decisive layer came from supporting troops, the auxilia, especially specialists like slingers and archers. The Romans didn't rely only on their citizen legionaries for everything. They recruited professionals from regions famous for certain skills. For example, the Balearic Islands supplied highly skilled slingers whose shots could be frighteningly accurate at distance. These specialists provided a suppressing, harassing layer of fire before the legionaries closed in with pila and short-range assaults. Which brings me back to Burnswark and a weird, fascinating little artifact, a category of sling bullet known as Type 3 glandes. These are smaller than a typical gland, elongated and cast in lead. Most strikingly, each has a deliberate small hole drilled into one side and weighs roughly 20 to 30 gray. That's light, about the mass of a small handful of coins, but heavy enough to sting when it hits. Here's the kicker. Archaeologists, led by John Reed of the Trimontium Trust, proposed that those holes were natia casting floor sting. The holes turned those bullets into whistling or howling projectiles. The idea is that when these hollowed glandes fly through the air, they produce a high-pitched, piercing sound, a noise meant less to kill than to terrify. In short, they were a purpose-built instrument of psychological warfare. Picture dozens or hundreds of these little bullets screaming through the air toward a defended hilltop. Terrifying. Yes, effective. The material evidence suggests the Romans thought so. First, the basic inventory, so we have a frame of reference. Archaeologists at Burnswark sorted the lead sling bullets glandes into three main types. Type 1, the common lemon-shaped ones. They're the heaviest, up to 60 gray. Think of these as the power shots. Type 2, acorn-shaped, middling size in use. And Type 3, the oddball, elongated ones weighing about 20 to 30 gray, much lighter than Type 1. Here's a statistic that jumps out. Roughly 20% of all the lead bullets recovered from the site have a drilled hole in them. 1 in 5. That's not an accident or a couple of rogue curiosities. That's a recurring, deliberate feature across a significant portion of the arsenal. Now focus on Type 3, the one with the tiny drilled hole, because that's where things start to get really interesting. These bullets are smaller and consistently made. Same general dimensions, similar weight, which indicates a controlled production process, not random tinkering. Reports on the hole size vary quite a bit. Some researchers describe them as tiny, only about 0.5 millimeter wide, while others measured holes as large as 5 millimeters or roughly 4 millimeter across and 6 millimeter deep. The exact numbers vary, but the key point is consistency of the overall bullet form and the repeated presence of the hole that stamps it as an intentional design choice. Why drill a hole in a bullet? Physics and human psychology give us the answer. When a solid object with a cavity slices through air at speed, it can produce a piercing whistling sound, essentially creating a resonant airflow. Think of how a tiny hole in a blade or a whistle mouthpiece turns motion into noise. The drilled glandes would not have been optimized for distance or penetration. They were ballistically inferior compared to heavier solid bullets. In plain terms, they didn't fly as far, didn't carry as much momentum, and weren't as good at physically injuring or breaking shields as the heavier 60G ones. So why make them at all? Because they bought something else. Psychological effect. Producing a shrill, penetrating whine overhead, especially in large numbers, is an instrument of terror. If you're on a fortification and suddenly hundreds of little bullets are screaming toward you, that sound changes everything. It disrupts concentration, raises stress, sows panic, and wears down resolve. In some situations, that break in morale is more militarily valuable than the physical wound the projectile causes. Let's talk production and cost, because the logistics matter. Drilling a hole into a lead bullet takes time and steady hands. It's not quick or easy. The fact that a sizable share, about 20% of the bullets, were produced this way tells us something important. First, this wasn't the work of a single tinkerer in a corner. It was an organized, ordered manufacturing choice. Second, Roman commanders or quartermasters allocated resources to produce a non-lethal effect at scale, which implies strategic intent. They wanted sound as a weapon. There's a tactical paradox here. You pay more effort and reduce physical effectiveness. Fewer kills per sling stone in order to gain a psychological multiplier. In an army famous for its efficiency and practicality, that's a huge signal. The only reason to accept such a trade-off is if the effect, the demoralization, the terror, the change in behavior, outweighs the downsides. That's a command-level decision, not an improvisation. Someone once proposed a different explanation. Maybe those holes were tiny containers for poison. After all, other ancient cultures made hollow projectiles for toxic payloads. But that hypothesis doesn't hold up at Burnswark for two big reasons. First, the holes are sometimes as small as 0.5 millimeter, essentially microscopic, far too tiny to hold or deliver a meaningful dose of toxin. Second, it makes no tactical sense. If the goal was poison, you'd put it in heavier, more penetrating projectiles that actually strike flesh. Instead, the holes appear mainly on the smallest, lightest stones, which tells us poison was probably not the point. So, the poison idea collapses under both practical and tactical scrutiny. The more plausible, evidence-backed narrative is straightforward. The hole was there to make noise. Sound happens when air is forced to oscillate in a regular way. For these Type 3 glanders, there are two plausible ways that a tiny drilled hole turns a flying bullet into a screaming pebble. The first is known as the hole tone or edge tone effect. As the stone or lead bullet moves through the air, a fast airflow interacts with the hole or an edge on the projectile and creates a self-sustaining oscillation. That oscillation produces a narrow band tone, basically a whistle. You can think of it like blowing across the top of a bottle. Moving air excites a frequency, and the second is that the drilled hole can connect to a small internal cavity and act like a tiny Helmholtz resonator. That cavity doesn't create the sound so much as amplify and stretch it, turning a brief whoosh into a longer, high-pitched buzz you're more likely to hear over the general noise of battle. Both mechanisms are simple physics, but combined they're powerful. A small difference in shape, hole size, or internal cavity volume changes the pitch and how loud the sound is, which is exactly why consistency in manufacturing matters and why archaeologists notice consistent Type 3 shapes. Modern experimental work, notably collaborations involving slinging specialists and the Trimontium Trust, tried to recreate these Type 3 projectiles based on the archaeological dimensions. The results are straightforward. Bullets with drilled holes do produce a clear whooshing or buzzing sound when launched. Important caveat, the experimental firings we can perform today probably underestimate the real effect. Ancient professional slingers, funditores, could fling projectiles at higher speeds than what's typically achieved in a demonstration. Aerodynamics tells us that higher velocity raises both pitch and loudness. Speed up the projectile, and that whoosh can turn into a shrill whistle or an ear-piercing buzz. So what a modern test calls a view might have been, in real combat, a shriek that made defenders flinch. So let's picture how a real attack might have gone down. At dawn, Roman soldiers from both camps move into position. The southern camp readies its artillery. Scorpions, small ballistae, and teams of professional slingers from Balearic or Syrian units. regions famous for their deadly accuracy. Slinging was a specialized skill that required continuous training. In competent hands, a professional slinger could reach effective ranges of around 120 meter. And by some contemporary estimates used for comparison, a well-thrown stone could deliver kinetic impact comparable to a modern handgun in terms of sudden, blunt trauma. That is why the Romans recruited or hired slingers from places famous for the skill, and also why auxiliary units garrisoned near Burnswark mattered so much. The manpower picture around Burnswark tells you how seriously Rome treated this operation. Units known to be stationed in nearby forts include Cohors the Secu Tungrorum, Germanorum Miliaria Equitata, and later Cohors the Fraum Tungrorum. Mixed cavalry and infantry auxilia, originally recruited from Germanic Belgic tribes, plus records of the 6th and 22nd legions in the region. This was a combined force with experienced auxiliary slingers, organized legionary infantry, and dedicated artillery crews. So how did the Romans choreograph all these pieces? Archaeology and logic give us a likely sequence, a choreography of suppression and shock that's frankly elegant in its brutality. When the signal is given, a storm of lead and stone erupts. The attack opens with concentrated missile fire. Ballistae sit on prepared platforms. The three brethren mounds in the southern Roman camp and deliver heavy stones, ballista stones weighing roughly 600 to 1,100 gray. These are the big targeted weapons. They smash gates, fracture parapets, and create literal holes in the defensive structure. Ballistae launch heavy bolts at gates and ramparts while slingers and archers pepper the line with glandes. The Romans used Type 1 glandes for maximum kinetic damage and Type 3 glandes for a different job entirely. Among those glandes, about 1 in 5, is a whistling Type 3 deliberately crafted to pierce the air with a high, unnerving tone. The aim isn't perfect aim at one gate, but to saturate the defender's senses, to create a continuous psychological pressure across the frontage. This is the tactical theory I like to call walking the enemy. Slingers could intentionally concentrate whistling fire on a chosen sector of the rampart. Because Type 3s are less lethal but highly annoying and disorienting, continuous whistling on one flank or section forces defenders to shift, to bunch up, to leave exposed positions, or to seek cover. Once the defenders cluster or move, heavier, lethal shots can be aimed where the enemy has been herded. It's a two-step trap. Sound to move, force to finish. Numbers make this clear. A small sling team will often let fly 3 to 4 stones each in quick succession. Now imagine 100 slingers all firing 4 stones nearly at the same moment. That's 400 stones in a single salvo. If about 20% of those are Type 3 whistlers, you get 80 whistling bullets screaming through the air at once. 80 high-pitched projectiles zipping toward a line of defenders is not subtle. It is an oral barrage layered on top of heavier bolts from ballistae and hard-hitting stones designed to injure. The whistling stones don't need to kill. Their mission is to break concentration, raise stress, and create panic. You're up on the rampart defending your position, and out of nowhere the air fills with this eerie, high-pitched screaming, whistling past you from every direction. You can see big bolts smashing at gates. You're getting hit by regular sling stones, and then over and over this unnerving, almost mechanical buzzing that you can't easily locate. It's disorienting, exhausting, and quite possibly belief-shaking. How long can we hold out against this? Hearing is primitive and primal. Loud, unpredictable noises raise adrenaline and degrade coordinated action. People shout, form frantically to check gaps, maybe duck behind earthworks. The result? Slower responses, fragmented command, more openings for a legionary assault, a tactical aside worth pausing on. Some reconstructions suggest the whistling bullets might not only have frightened defenders, but also provided acoustic camouflage for approaching troops, making it harder for defenders to distinguish the sound of ladders, sappers, or troops moving into assault positions. That's speculation, but it's tantalizing. While the defenders are being suppressed, ballistae on the 3 brethren platforms target gates and strong points with massive stones. Some estimates put ballista projectiles up to 1.1 kiwa that can shatter wooden barriers. With those holes opened and defenders distracted or pinned by the whistling and the rain of lead, legionary infantry advance in disciplined formations, shields locked in the testudo if needed, and press the assault through the gaps. A critical practical advantage here is logistics and rate of fire. Ballistae are powerful but slow to reload. Each shot takes time and requires heavy ammo. Sling bullets, by contrast, are light, cheap, and portable. That allows the slingers to maintain a continuous curtain of fire, a necessary condition for the short, overwhelming assault the Romans favored at Burnswark. What Burnswark reveals is tactical sophistication. The Romans were not only mastering blunt force siegecraft, they were assembling combined arms effects, heavy artillery precision, mass missile volume, and psychological operations into a single coherent doctrine. Funditores weren't back-of-house extras. They were central to the plan. Auxiliar cohorts like the Nerviorum and Tungrorum and legion detachments provided the muscle and coordination that let such a combined effect succeed. Finally, remember the after effects. The hill fort at Burnswark was never reoccupied after the event. Whether the episode was a punitive assault or a massive demonstration, the archaeological story is loud and clear. Rome brought a mixed toolbox of destruction and terror and used it with purpose. You know, it's fascinating when you really stop and think about it. Ancient armies weren't just about muscle and metal. They experimented. They innovated. Take the Greeks, for example. They once made hollow clay sling bullets, tiny projectiles that could carry poison inside. The idea was sneaky. Strike an enemy and let the toxin do the rest, silently, invisibly, like death delivered molecule by molecule. It was warfare through chemistry, a killer that whispered instead of roared. But the Romans, they played by a different rule book entirely. They didn't want silence, they wanted noise. Where the Greeks sought secrecy, the Romans sought spectacle. At Burnswark Hill in southern Scotland, that idea came to life in brutal clarity. Modern historians call it a dramatic episode of exemplary force. In plain English, it was a warning. The Romans weren't just trying to crush that one hilltop tribe. They were performing. They were putting on a show for every other tribe in southern Scotland. This is what happens when you resist Rome. So when we look at those whistling sling bullets today, they're not just bits of metal. They're echoes. Echoes of a strategy that mixed engineering, psychology, and raw intimidation. The Romans weren't just conquerors of land. They were manipulators of emotion. They engineered not just victory, but submission. And maybe that's the bigger lesson here. Ancient battles weren't just about swords clashing and shields shattering. They were theater. Carefully choreographed performances of dominance. Every whistle, every crash, every scream was part of the act. So the next time you imagine a Roman battlefield, don't just picture the spears and the blood. Picture the sound, the eerie chorus of whistling lead, the drumming of artillery, the roar of an army that understood fear as a weapon. What do you think about that? Let me know down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts, and if you enjoyed this video, give it a like, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the untold stories of history. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in tomorrow's video. Goodbye.